Welcome to Music Student 101. Form and analysis is our attempt to make sense of the movements within the music. One of these movements is rondo. Let's discuss. To see graphics of this analysis, you may wish to go to our website, musicstudent101.com. Click on this episode, episode 114, and follow along. Here are your hosts, Jeremy Burns and Matthew Scott Phillips.
Don't you feel sophisticated?
So pretty.
Isn't that pretty? I almost had our announcer Mike speak with a snooty voice while doing, but that's been done before.
Yeah, good old Beethoven.
With the exception of maybe one episode, I think it was the Middle Ages or Renaissance music one of those.
Right, yeah.
We have always used our own music for the bumper tracks, your compositions, my compositions.
Right, yep.
And then on that one episode, we had our friend Sarah James singing some Hildegard. Von
right,
Bingen.
I remember.
And what you just heard was done from a friend of ours who we met through a friend of mine and a friend of ours.
friend.
Angela Senich is the keyboard player for Jenny's Mixtape.
Yes. Hey, Angela.
Hey, and you met her recently, didn't you?
I did.
And I was asking her if she, by chance, because she also does a lot of recording and she does a lot of classical music. I was trying to see if she had a version of this.
Right.
She was like, oh, I could probably whip one up, but I'm not sure if I have time,
Yeah.
Let me check with my friend Dan. So her friend Dan Collins runs a site called HD Piano.
HD Piano.
You can go there and check it out, hdpiano.com.
Yep.
And it's a great little piano lesson site.
Yes.
And where you might hear something like what you heard.
Right, go check that out.
And learn how to play it.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, again, I want to thank Dan Collins of HD Piano.
Thank you, Dan.
And I want to thank Angela Senich for hooking us up.
Thank you, Angela.
And maybe down the road we'll get to hear some of Angela's stuff.
Oh, that would be exciting.
Yeah. But anyways, what you heard was an old classic, a classical music classic.
For Elise.
For Elise by Ludwig van Beethoven.
Yep. One of his bagatelles.
Yeah.
And, there's at least one music critic that I read somewhere that said Beethoven was at his most personal and intimate at the solo piano. His solo piano works were the real Beethoven.
Oh. So never mind all those symphonies.
Right, well,
dun, 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 dun.
Make of that what you will, but yeah.
Well, it makes sense. It's a very intimate, solo piano is a very intimate thing.
Yeah, and this piece is obviously extraordinarily famous. You can hear it anywhere.
Yeah, and that's going to be what we kind of feature in this episode.
Yeah.
Because it is an example of a rondo.
It is a small rondo, also called a 5-part rondo. We're going to talk about what that means.
Now, Matt, in our discussion on the phone the other day, we started talking about rondo.
We did.
And you mentioned Schubert. Which set us off on a digression about the Batman music, the movie for the new Batman movie. We talked about how Ave Maria was kind of featured
in that, along with Nirvana's Something in the Way.
Yeah, which is just fantastic. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
It really I love the music more than I did the movie personally. It wasn't a bad movie, but the music was that awesome.
That movie was very 90s. It was more 90s than the Batman that actually came out in the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, really.
But then we started talking about, that got us into Star Wars.
Oh, yeah.
And John Williams.
Yeah, and some of the things John Williams does.
What did you say about the themes, and you hit me with the themes on the good and the light? And
yeah, everybody knows, please don't sue me, John Williams, but, everybody knows the kind of, right?
I think Darth Vader.
Yeah, and the, it kind of is the going down the third, the seminal interval, the salient interval there's, right?
Minor third?
It's actually a major third.
Is it a major third?
Yeah. But, there are places where, like in the Yoda theme, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to pound this out, but where he's actually going up a major third. So there's the down the major third is the dark side, and the light side is the up a major third. Yeah, and the Anakin Padme theme song, starts with that same kind of interval, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. Or yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, sort of.
There's a little bit
cueing
of
us in musically that the evil that Darth Vader is going to be is rooted in his love for this woman, and Anakin's love for Padme, right? The very sort of kind of sweet kind of thing that evolves into kind of right. So I could go on about John Williams forever like that. Well, and the many things he did in Star Wars to make Star Wars musically as complicated and complex and fascinating as the movies themselves. Yeah.
Well, for anyone that thinks this is a digression, it comes back full circle because John Williams also did the Raiders March.
Oh yeah,
the theme for the Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Right, which I don't remember off the top of my head, but
dun 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 dun.
Oh,
dun,
that one.
Dun, dun.
Yeah.
Well, it turns out that's in Rondo.
Is it really?
Yes. So first example for Rondo form.
Yeah, I'll have to go back and listen to that. I believe you, but...
Well, maybe by the end of this episode, you'll know what to listen for.
Hopefully so.
All right, man, let's get into our little social segment here, shall we?
Okay, yeah. So we have a new review.
Yes, we do.
From Joey B. 1979, who gives us 5 stars. Thank you, Joey.
Thank you, Joey.
And Joey says, fantastic. As someone who has found the piano later in life, late 30s, I found this podcast a fantastic resource in between lessons. Your discussions have sparked in-depth discussions with me and my teacher. Oh, that's good to hear. Mm-hmm. I enjoy the banter as well. It feels more human and natural rather than other podcasts that can come off as dry as week-old oatmeal. Yeah, it's funny. I thought in the first episodes, at least, we were also pretty dry.
We were at least a week-old oatmeal.
Yeah, right. I don't even know how it evolved the way it is, but we try to keep it personal. I've always said this podcast resembles a slightly more organized version of the kind of conversations we have over a pint, at the local bar when we get started talking about music, right?
So, or over an oatmeal.
Over an oatmeal.
Just throw some brown sugar and some raisins in that bad boy
and it's
spice
fine.
It up. Yeah.
And it's fine. Anyway, Joey continues, I've been taking lessons for 5 years now, and I always look forward to the next topic. The episode with the counterpoint specifically on Fuchs's book really spoke to me as you guys simplified as much as you can when talking about counterpoint. Yeah, no kidding. Very well. And I came out of it with a new understanding and even more questions that I could go back to my teacher. Thanks, guys. Well, thank you, Joey, for that wonderful review. I'm glad you're getting so much out of it. Yeah, simplifying counterpoint was a task. Those episodes took more preparation than most.
Yes, it was 3 episodes, and I think we had to do one in between just to give me a little breather.
Just to give ourselves a break.
Yeah.
Those rules get complicated.
Yeah.
But counterpoint is actually the basis of tonal harmony, which makes it the basis of most of the music you hear and listen to.
That's a good point.
Even when you're strumming chords on a guitar, we have a tendency to think of those chords as elements of this in and of themselves, right? We don't tend to think of them as 6 notes that are moving in particular ways.
Right. We think of them.
But they are, 4 or 5 or 6 notes moving in particular ways, when you actually sit down and look at it, and it gives them their quality.
Yeah.
Not to mention it gives certainly classical music the quality of forward direction that it has, that's That comes from the rules of counterpoint that you may not know, but your brain absolutely does. Just listen to something that doesn't respect them and see what happens. Thank you for that wonderful review. It's great. You can always review us on any of your podcast preferred delivery methods.
Yeah.
It helps gets the word out. And, it helps us move up in the ranks of above the dry old oatmeal music podcasts and everything else. So thank you very much.
If Joey is in his late 30s and that's later in life,
I'm devastated.
We're ancient.
Yeah, we're in real trouble.
Joey, you're in the middle. You're in the prime. You're in the middle. Prime
this is barely the end of the beginning, Joey.
But thanks again, Joey.
Thanks again.
Okay, we got ourselves a new patron I want to talk about.
Yes.
We got Micah Kamalason.
Okay.
From Danville, Ohio.
Not
a whole lot to say from Micah, but here we are. I'm 19 years old. I live in Ohio, and I've only played piano for about 2 years, but I'm thinking about getting into guitar as well. I listen mostly to Japanese music and have a passion for video game soundtracks as well. I found you guys on Spotify. You were the first to pop up when I searched music podcast.
Oh, that's good to know.
How about that? Thanks again, says Micah.
Yeah. Thank you, Micah. And Micah is a patron.
Yeah, a Patreon patron.
Yeah.
And of course, as we mentioned before, we do have a Patreon site where people can donate to us.
Yes, indeed.
And we have couple little sweet deals for $1 a month. You can get in there and hear all the bonus episodes.
Well, of which there are a few.
Quite a few. And then see
a few videos of Jeremy's podcast band playing. And
indeed, live music or recorded video music.
Recorded video music.
And then for $3 a month, you can get a special little Music Student 101 cup, like a mug.
A little
kind of a vacuum seal kind of mug. And then for $5 a month, of course, you get the mug and you get all those things you can get into the site, but then you also can ask us a question and we'll make a bonus episode.
Right, you get the privilege of at least 15 minutes of us answering your music theory question specifically.
Mm-hmm. But anyways, that's a great way to support us if you want to do that. And we appreciate it.
We certainly appreciate it. It keeps us going. It really, really does.
I listen to a lot of podcasts and I rarely review or donate to their Patreon site. So it takes a lot for me to do that. And
it does.
I really appreciate, we appreciate the fact that you guys are doing that.
We understand that you can't just give $5 to every podcast you listen to. So we really appreciate our patrons and we thank you from the bottom of our hearts.
Yes. We love to learn about our fellow musicians and the people who listen to the show.
Yeah, there's a great community that's formed around this podcast at this point.
And speaking of that great community, we have a +1.
Yes, we do. We have yet another listener mail from Matt Lemon, Dayton, Ohio, who says, Jeremy and Matt, thanks for putting together this great podcast. I love to run, and when I do, I often listen to podcasts. I recently came across yours looking to find something I could use to improve my piano playing, but it was hard to find something that was effective at teaching without necessarily having to be at the piano, and was interesting enough that I could listen for about an hour and still be engaged. Anyway, you nailed it. Oh, thank you, Matt. I should say I started on acoustic guitar, then fiddle in a bluegrass group. Nice. And started with piano more recently, 2 years ago. I've been listening in order as recommended, and we do recommend that.
We do.
And I'm currently up to episode 27. I'm an electrical engineer by trade and 11 years out of college, so higher education music is not in my future. But your series is about the right level where I know enough from playing music to catch up onto most things, but it's a lot of material I wouldn't have otherwise learned, which hopefully informs my performing in practice, and I can promise you it will. I'm sure by this point you are swimming in emails. Are we swimming in emails?
Waiting.
Kind of waist deep in emails?
Yeah.
But your past selves at least sounded like you could use more feedback, so a few comments. The fact that you play examples of what you mean is why I enjoy the podcast. You do well with this in the keys for most episodes, but when you had guest musicians on, I could have used more of the musician playing examples. For example, with Aaron Branson, episode 26, there was an extended discussion about the names of sound effects that exist, which would have been great to hear as he went through them. Yeah, it would have been great had he brought
the bass.
Yeah. we can't always control what our guest musicians, how they interpret, what they want to do.
As the producer, I should have probably asked him to bring his bass, but really it's just more of a discussion on the instruments, but that really would have made a difference, I think.
Yeah.
So that's good feedback.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. The discussion, I was just about to ask, what was episode 25 again, because I barely remember, but Matt has answered for me.
Yeah.
The discussion in episode 25 on how progressions often fit the circle of fifths was great. I was stuck thinking of it as a 12-position circle of perfect fifths and didn't think about it until you explained the 1-4-7-3-6-2-5-1. Go back and listen to that episode if you're confused. That equally important for the key of interest is a 7-position circle down fifths all the way around the circle of fifths, which is also up fourths. If you're going counterclockwise, you're going up fourths, which is the same thing as down fifths because they're inversions. Within the notes of the key, such as C, F, B diminished, E minor, A minor, D minor, G, C. 1-4-7-3-6-2-5-1. Yeah, that is the way that works.
We can do a Jenny's 1-4-7-3-6-2-5-1.
There you go. Anyways, thanks for your dedication to sharing your music theory knowledge, Matt. Oh, thank you, Matt. Thank you for the awesome feedback.
Yeah.
And also, thank you for your email in general. The circle of fifths really defines everything. Well, not everything. It defines a whole lot of the music we listen to.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about classical music, the circle of fifths really defines everything. Even when you're not doing the circle of fifths, you're sort of deliberately not, you know, like in the Romantic era. In popular music, you know, the circle of fifths is a great way to make your music sound less like a jam and more like an emotionally driven, forward-moving kind of thing, right? Which is why it borrows, because it is so closely tied to classical music. Who's that classical music is a forward-moving thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, wonderful feedback. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And for you, Matt Lemon, and for anyone else who is curious, I will play a couple of my favorite bass effects.
Oh, nice.
Right here. I got my bass.
Yeah.
My Warwick.
Nice.
Well, that's clean.
Yep.
It might not sound terribly clean because...
Technical difficulties.
Yeah, technical difficulties.
I love a bass player that's not afraid of the mid-range.
No, it's my favorite.
Get a little mids in there. Get it to sound like something.
So one of my favorite effects is kind of a distortion. It's called muff fuzz. What muff means is actually muffled fuzz.
Right.
We do the Beverly Hills by Weezer.
Right.
So it's got this... You know?
Right.
1, 4, 5, 7. So there is fuzz. It's kind of like a muffled fuzz sound.
Yeah.
And you can tweak the distortion to be a little bit heavier,
right,
for the Nirvana stuff.
Yeah.
And then a less fuzzy thing, a less muff fuzz is what I use for Sabotage. What I use for Sabotage by the Beastie Boys. So
nice.
So, and then another one I use is called it's called an envelope filter.
I actually know what that is.
Let's see if I can find that thing. There it is, synth. I use this for Hey Ya, when we do Hey Ya.
Yeah.
The envelope filter is basically an auto wah.
Yeah.
When you hit the string, it opens up.
Yeah.
And then it closes over time. You can set those parameters.
Yeah.
So we got that little breakdown that we're like, shake it like a Polaroid picture. So,
yeah.
And really, I'm kind of a minimalist when it comes to that kind of thing.
Most bass players are compared to guitarists.
You know, there's also reverb, which we talked about in our effects episode. You can go back and listen to that. Yeah. Reverb. And then there's a couple little other things like phaser and flanger, which just take the sound and turn the kind of opening and closing kind of frequency kind of thing.
Yeah, it's a modulator, basically.
It's a modulator, yeah. Modulating is the changing the sound of the actual instrument. Reverb is adding echoes to it.
Right.
Fuzz is adding grit and distortion to it.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a little something for you, Matt.
I love it. I think we need more of Jeremy's bass playing in these podcasts. That's my feedback on the podcast. More Jeremy playing bass.
Beyond the bumper tracks for every...
Beyond...
with the exception of this one? All right. Well, I think we can move on, shall we?
Let's do.
Thanks again, Matt. And
yes.
Thanks, Joey, and thanks, Micah.
Yes.
And also, one more little thing. I want to say congratulations to our friends from Australia, Queensland. Text the legend.
The immortal Tex.
A.K.A. Chris Owens.
Yeah.
Is getting hitched.
Oh, no.
To our good Cheryl Anderson.
Oh, wonderful.
Of Anderson Lane, who we've heard their music before.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd say that this is a match made in music. Tex and Cheryl. And they are actually getting married at the end of this month. So we want to give them a shout out and wish them all the happiness and good times and good music.
I wonder if I can play any wedding music. Nope. Nope, can't. Never mind. I can do this.
There we go. Perfect fourth.
I can do that. So.
Anyways, again, congratulations to you guys, and keep us posted. Stay in touch.
Wonderful, yeah.
Now, what are we talking about today, Matt?
Well, this is a form episode, right?
Yes, Form and Analysis Part 4.
Form and Analysis Part 4. And when we are analyzing form, just a brief refresher, we are talking about the path a piece of music takes through itself. You know, it does something, and then it does something different, and then it'll do the first thing again, or what have you, right? It is the structure, you know, verse, chorus, guitar solo, verse, chorus. That would be a type of form, right? The sort of model that it fits in.
Okay.
And previously, we started talking about just these basic building blocks of how these forms are constructed. Melodic motifs, phrases, building up to combinations of phrases, which we called periods, right?
Yeah, we talked about that in Part 1, which was episode 20, and we called that the building blocks, basically.
Yep. And then those building blocks build up into slightly larger things, but still not that big, which we call the small forms.
So backing it up a little bit, the building blocks being the smallest being the motif. The motif. That goes into a bigger phrase.
The phrase, yeah.
Which you add those together and then you got yourself a period.
Yes.
And then at the end of the period, it might either be a cadence, like, you know, it's kind of like the way the sentence ends. Basically.
Right, yeah. You kind of have a musical sentence with the phrase.
It's either going to be a question or a half cadence that might be set up for the answer later on, which would be the full cadence or the perfect cadence.
Yeah, a lot of things can happen. Yeah,
a lot of things.
Yeah, so you know, go back and listen to episode 53, which is small forms.
Yes.
Right, and so those building blocks then build into small forms, such as binary, meaning there are kind of two things, and those two things are really kind of dependent on each other. Ternary, which it turns out there's really still kind of two things, but those two things are less dependent on each other, right? Go listen to the episode. You know?
Yeah.
Things like theme and variations, where you play usually like a small binary and then play it over and over and over again with this, you know, different things being varied in the actual music, right? Go to a minor key or add 16th notes or something like that.
Expansion or compression.
Yeah, all of those good things.
And that you make the longer notes shorter or the shorter notes
longer. Yeah, diminution. You know, that kind of stuff. And then those small forms, binary and ternary, got expanded, got stretched out. It's not like there was more music added to the end. There was more music added in the middle, and they just kind of stretched out and got longer and bigger. And then we got this thing called sonata form, which is this big, huge, complex thing with a lot of moving parts that we discussed in episode 93. I think we even made Jeremy write a sonata form, if I recall correctly.
Yes, I wrote a sonata, and it was called It's Not a Sonata, just in case there wasn't a sonata. But it turned out to be a sonata, so I guess it's a sonata.
How very emo of you.
How very emo. And then also part 2 is episode 53, just if you guys want to give that a listen.
Right, and then part 3 is episode 93.
93, so quite a spread between these episodes.
Yeah, well, but we're back on them now.
Yeah.
Which is what's important. So I guess today what we're doing is going on to one of at least our other large forms, you know, which is sort of the phrases and small forms stretched out and made into bigger structures, and that's called a rondo.
Okay. Or this is one of the larger forms, right?
This is one of the larger forms.
Sonata being a large form.
Sonata is a large form. Rondo is a large form.
Okay.
Compound ternary, it would be a large form, which I'm sure we will talk about at some point.
Okay.
Yeah.
It does get a little bit tricky with these forms because I know that there's a whole bunch of, you probably heard things like saraband,
Yeah,
allemande,
saraband, the gigue.
the gigue airs. There's
The allemande.
There's a whole bunch of Baroque specific forms, and I think we'll just have to do our own episode. Oh,
We're probably going to have to do that because, so there's all these forms in the Baroque era. And the Baroque era in so many ways is its own thing, right? And this is one of them. There's so many forms in the Baroque era, the 1600s-ish, up until Bach dies, in the 1700s somewhere. I'm terrible with dates. I think it's 1750 maybe or something. Anyway, terrible with dates. And those forms are things like ritornello form. There's all of those dances that you were mentioning, the allemande, the saraband, the gigue, the tambo, et cetera, right? And there are things like the church sonata and the chamber sonata. And then in the classical era, a lot of these forms kind of evolve and then get codified and crystallized into very specific things, whereas in the Baroque era, they were looser. And then some of those Baroque forms just kind of get abandoned. They just kind of get done away with. And so we have this set of forms in the classical era that define the classical era and then are, sort of evolve and expanded and played with and things in the Romantic era up until about the Impressionist era, right? And then the 20th century comes along and everything gets blown up. But even in like neoclassical 20th century music, some of these forms continue to exist.
So people might have been writing sonatas, but it wasn't the prevailing style of writing. Did that style?
You mean in the Baroque era?
No, when you said later on in the
20th century?
Yes, 20th century.
Well, in the 20th century, people are dealing with a lot, and they're looking for all kinds of ways to just completely deconstruct music from how they've written in the past. It's like we've got 200 years of all this classical music, although they're not calling it that at the time. And it's like how can we do something different? So they're really looking to destroy, and the forms were a target too. But within that, you also have people like Stravinsky, who in the 30s are bringing these forms back, and it's purely the form, like the harmonic language and textures and chords and things used are very, very 20th century, but the actual form is
okay, and it
is still there. It is, and it's usually not sonata. It's usually like ternary or binary or something like that.
And is Stravinsky keeping honoring the cadences at the end of these forms with ones and fives and stuff like that?
I would be doubtful or skeptical of that.
Right.
Maybe if you squinted at it hard enough,
there might be a five in there somewhere.
Yeah,
it's probably got a few other chord members.
That's a good question, actually. I would love to do some research on that myself and be able to answer that. But sitting here right now, I'm rather skeptical that he did that a whole lot.
Sure. Interesting.
Yeah.
Now, we did have a listener a while back named Michael from San Francisco who requested a little bit more history.
Okay.
So, Matt, what you got?
So I'm up, huh?
I think so. Can you give us a brief history on the rondo form? And you kind of did a second ago.
Yes. Yeah. All right. So the TLDR of the history of the rondo form. So in the Baroque era, one of these dances is called a rondo. It's French. Rondeau.
Is there an X in there, maybe? No X?
No X.
Okay.
I
just
don't get me started on French. It's called the rondo. And the rondo is sort of classified as having this sort of motif that comes back a lot.
Rounded? Could it come from rounded?
I don't speak French, but that is possible. That is possible. What it is it's got this motif that kind of comes back at the end of every phrase. Right? And in the rondo, it is basically just a motif. Later in the Baroque era, though, they decided to make this motif an actual section of the music, by which I mean is sort of a, it can be a double period, or even, to the extent that they knew that they were doing this, a small binary form or something, that is an actual section of the music, and they call this the ritornello.
Okay.
And this is the little return.
The little return.
I can speak Italian.
Ritornella. Okay.
Called that because it comes back over and over again throughout the course of a piece of music. Listen to the first movement of any Vivaldi concerto, or most of the Brandenburg Concerti by Bach.
Okay.
And what you'll find is you start with this ritornello theme. That's like sort of the main recognizable theme of the movement. And then it'll go off and do something completely different, what we call an episode.
Okay.
Right? And then it'll come back and do the ritornello theme again. And then it'll come off and do something again completely different again. And then come back and do the ritornello again. Mm-hmm. And then yet a third thing completely different. And then the ritornello forever along the pieces. Right? And that is why they call it a little return. The piece is structured around this theme kind of coming back again and again and again.
Yeah, okay.
Right? And the things in between, like I say, we call episodes. Usually, like in a Vivaldi concerto, for example, the episodes will be when the solo violinist is playing and showing off.
Okay.
Because that's what a concerto is. There's a solo instrument showing off, right?
Oh, and earlier you said concerti. Is that?
Concerti, plural for concerto.
Plural. How cool. I've never heard that before.
Yeah. It's Italian, man.
All right.
Yeah.
Concerti.
Concerti, yeah. So in in Vivaldi concerti, the soloist is playing and showing off during the episodes, and then during the ritornello form, the whole orchestra is playing this main theme.
Okay.
Right? And that's called ritornello form. This translates into the classical era. So Haydn comes along and he sort of, does away with all that thick Baroque counterpoint and stuff, and he codifies this form a lot more, crystallizes it a lot more, as is what is happening with these forms in the classical era. So rather than just episodes where there's something completely different than the ritornello, then the completely different than the ritornello, we sort of start having a unity where some of the episodes come back.
Uh-huh.
And we start having, I'm not going to say more clearly defined delineation, but we start having more sort of harmonic flow from episode to return, and we start having sort of characteristics coming up again and again that make the individual things sort of more of a set thing. For example, we'll do that theme, and then the first time we go off, we won't really go into a new key. Uh-huh. But the second time we will. It'll be a completely different key. And those kind of characteristics tend to be recognizable from example to example in the classical form.
But within the A material, the original theme.
Yeah.
And then, say, the B section or the C section, are you saying that these episodes contain little, when you're saying more congruent or something like that, as they're containing pieces?
They flow more harmonically. So like and we might as well go ahead and start attaching letter names to these too, right?
Sure.
Because once they get into the classical era, they're a rondo form, and we think of rondo as either A, B, A, C, A.
Uh-huh.
Right? The A being the thing that keeps coming back, right?
Yes, there's
A, B, A, C, A.
A is in between all the parts and closes it and
Exactly.
opens it. Yeah.
Or the larger rondo, A, B, A, C, A, B, A. Mm-hmm. So there's this balance of A, B, A on either side of this central C section that is completely different from anything you've ever heard before.
Yeah.
Right? And then, these B sections will be sort of just a chord progression, will not have as much sort of, it won't be as recognizable a theme or a section in of itself. It'll be just this kind of digression, and then returns to A. Yeah. Whereas C will be, you could take a scalpel and take C out by itself and just play C by itself, and it makes sense as a piece of music.
Uh-huh.
And then A, B, A again at the end. Right?
Okay.
So these kind of characteristics become something that every composer is doing.
By the early classical period.
By the early classical. And now we are calling it a rondo, R-O-N-D-O.
Uh-huh.
Italian again. And that continues through Beethoven, as we will see. Beethoven wrote some very famous and very exemplary rondos that they teach in graduate theory courses to this day. And, into the Romantic era where, A becomes a whole 5-part rondo in itself and, stuff like that happens and, it just gets pushed and expanded. And, there's a reason some of those things are 30 minutes long. And all sorts of things get toyed with and moved around. Big, huge codas are attached to the end and preludes to the beginning, and
Well, today we just have a 3.5-minute rondo.
We have a nice, simple little 3.5, 5-part rondo to talk about. It'll be great.
That'll be nice and useful.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned that in grad school, the forms will be more complex than the ones we've discussed so far. We haven't even gotten into the grad school kind of stuff, right?
Is interesting. Is grad school more complex? Well, you go a lot deeper in grad school. The stuff still exists. We're just probably going to go over it with one kind of thinner brush for right now.
Well, you mentioned you could do a whole semester on the sonata form, right?
Oh, absolutely.
A whole textbook on the sonata form.
Oh, absolutely.
Hey, I got another question for you before we get into the rondos, the characteristics of the rondo form and the rule or conventions or whatever. Because this is something I've been a little confused about. Okay, you go out for a night at this symphony to see the symphony.
Yes.
Now, let's see here. Say they're going to play Beethoven's Ninth. I mean, I'm just using an example.
Let's use a simpler example for the sake.
Give me one.
Beethoven's Ninth is complicated. Let's say you're going to hear Haydn's London Symphony. Is a big closer at the end of the night.
Okay, so you got within the whole piece, within the whole symphony, you have movements.
You have movements.
Now, each of these movements within for the first movement could have, is it typically a sonata or is there?
Each individual movement will be one of those.
Okay, it'll be one of these forms we're talking about.
In a multi-movement work, movements are kind of like chapters in a book.
Okay.
Right? They are kind of enclosed in themselves. They represent an idea in themselves, but they're also part of a larger thing.
Yes.
All right? Now, Beethoven really expressed his genius in sort of redefining how we thought of why 4 particular movements ought to be squished together and called a symphony and not interchangeable or anything, right? Because he would bring themes from the first movement back in the third movement, and do stuff like that to sort of conceptually and audibly link his movements together. When you're talking about Haydn, it would be more like just 4 separate pieces of music, but they would have key relationships in common. So, if we were talking about a symphony in D major, the first movement is going to be in D. Second movement is going to be in either the 4 or the 6, right? So G or B minor or something. Third movement is going to be in the 5th A, and then the fourth movement is going to be in D. So basically, there are 4 distinct pieces of music that are nonetheless linked together in a sort of meta way, in a sort of higher conceptual way. That's what a movement is.
Okay.
Right? It's kind of like, think of it as like chapters in a book. Telling part of the story, but then there's more to be had, right?
Okay, so go on, I'm sorry.
So when we talk about these 4 movements, each of them is a self-contained piece of music in and of themselves. Right?
Based on some of these forms we're talking about.
Based on some of these forms. So movement 1 in the classical era was almost always a sonata form.
Okay.
Always. The term sonata form was actually first used in the 19th century pejoratively. You always have this sonata form. Every sonata does this.
Oh?
Blah, 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 right? Yeah, it was actually originally the sonata allegro form. Every allegro of every sonata does this. Every first movement of a string quartet does this. Every first movement of a symphony does this. But it was a fair criticism.
So, but you got something good that people liked at one point, and then all of a sudden they just decide that they don't like it anymore.
That's music for you.
Is that the IPA of the music world?
It's the IPA, kind of overdone, and people are getting sick of it. Yeah. So the first movement was always a sonata form.
Okay.
The second movement, it was a lot more loose as to what kind of form you could have your second movement be. Theme and variations happened a lot. Sometimes there would be just a sort of a fairly large and involved rounded binary, a small form like that, right?
Minuet and trio, would that be?
Minuet and trio was typically the third movement.
Okay.
So a third movement would typically be a minuet and trio, which is a type of what we call compound ternary.
Okay.
It does a thing that is completely self-enclosed, does another thing that is completely self-enclosed, and then does that first completely self-enclosed thing a second time.
Did I move too soon into the third movement, or was there more?
Nah, it's fine.
Okay, so sonata for the first movement, second movement typically
Variable. Yeah, usually slow is the big thing about the second movement. Okay. It had to be slow, at least until you got to Beethoven.
Okay.
And then the third movement would be the dance movement, typically a minuet and trio, right? And then the fourth movement was typically a rondo. I've heard scholars say that the fourth movement could also be another sonata form, and I don't ever seem to encounter that actually happening. Okay. Maybe once or twice. To me, the fourth movement most typically was some kind of rondo.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's what we're talking about. So these forms enclose entire pieces. There's not a thing where, the first movement starts off as a sonata and then there's a rondo in the middle or something. That's not the way it works.
Okay.
These words describe the entire form of at least a movement of music.
Well, I'm glad you clarified that because I certainly was a little foggy on that myself. Yeah.
What I'm here for.
Yeah, thank you. All right. Let's get into the attributes of the rondo, shall we?
The attributes of the rondo.
So describe this rondo, the fourth movement.
So the fourth movement of a rondo.
Not that it's always the fourth movement, but typically.
I mean, always is as dangerous a word as never. But when you're talking about the classical music, when you're talking about the classical era, rather, especially. You're talking about the last movement being the rondo most of the time.
Standard conventions.
The classical era was all about standard conventions. Was all about it.
Okay.
And that's a standard convention.
Very good.
They're usually upbeat. They're usually fast-tempoed. Yeah, you kind of want to end on an exciting note, right? And they've been described as light and playful. Beethoven certainly wrote rondos that were anything but light and playful.
We're going to learn.
Yeah. And this one is very light compared to some of the intense Beethoven string quartets ending on rondos and minor keys and stuff. Go listen to some Beethoven rondos. You'll be amazed.
So you can be light and playful in a minor key.
Well, probably.
No. He probably goes to major or something like that. When he...
yeah, something like that. Anyway.
I'm speculating here.
It's thought of as not as difficult to understand as the sonata form. I personally think that's kind of giving the short shrift to the rondo. I think it can definitely be complex in its own way.
Okay.
What it is not is, the very codified, this is going to happen, then this is going to happen, and this is going to happen kind of thing. That sonata form is. In rondo, you have this basic form, this ABA-CA or ABA-C-ABA. Within A and B and C, there's a little more freedom to compose as you will. But as we'll see, that doesn't mean you can just do anything. There are conventions within those two. Yeah.
Guidelines.
It's just not as involved in how one part moves to another necessarily as sonata form is, according to some people. Now, I think that attitude is giving short shrift to the rondo. I think it's a fairly complex way to put something together, personally.
But
that's just me.
We are doing a whole episode on it.
Yeah. Usually the final movement of a sonata, which is either a piece of music for solo piano or for piano and solo instrument. Right? So now we're talking about what kinds of music you're listening to with these forms, right? It is usually the final movement of a string quartet, and it is usually the final movement of a symphony. Yeah.
Closing time.
Sort of, yeah.
But we all go out on a good note. Everyone's going to be all energetic for that carriage ride.
That's the idea.
Feeling all good and happy.
That's the idea.
Maybe.
That's the basic, until you get to Beethoven, and Beethoven is never happy. I can't think of a single piece of Beethoven's that I would call happy.
Oh, look at his face. He just looks...
The Heroic Overture, maybe. But, all right, it's a rabbit hole even I'm not willing to go down. But
Beethoven had issues.
Beethoven had issues. The Ode to Joy is extremely happy once you get to the end, I guess. The Ninth Symphony.
Yeah, totally. But we ain't talking about that
That is
today.
all about happy. We're not talking about that today. It is technically don't let me say something wrong.
Don't say anything wrong.
Let's just not say that. Let's just skip that.
Okay.
I was going to say it is technically a rondo, but then I thought about it and thought, no, it is. It may actually be a theme and variations because Beethoven's nuts, or it might actually be a rondo.
We don't have time to listen to it right now.
We don't have time to listen to it.
So we'll just skip over that. Okay, so let's get into this whole refrain thing. That's
The refrain. The main device of the rondo form is the refrain, which is what it inherited from the old ritornello form from the Baroque era. This thing that comes back again and again after every digression. And when you're sitting there listening to a rondo form, you can sort of stick with it and know where you are musically when that thing comes back. It's like, oh, there's that theme again, right? And we're back somewhere familiar to us. Yeah.
We have kind of like you said on that last sonata thing. It's like the hero goes on a journey,
right?
They go to and then things get weird,
and then things get weird, and then things come back,
and then they come back just a little changed. They come back just a little different.
Yeah, and I guess support for the argument of rondo being less complex is that it maybe has a little bit less of that very, very narrative aesthetic attached to it. Because you are constantly coming back to the same place.
Right. Yeah. You're just going to work and coming home.
Yeah, I think it just does it quicker and more often, but...
And then, so in the case, we'll get into it later on, but in the case of For Elise,
yes,
the opening material... and
everybody knows this piece, right?
That would be considered the A material.
That would be considered the A section, the refrain.
The refrain, but it also comes back. So when it comes back, it becomes a ritornello?
No, ritornello is a Baroque term. We don't use that term when we're analyzing classical era music.
Okay, we're out of there then.
Yeah.
What do we call that then? The refrain. We're calling it the refrain. Okay.
Or the A section.
Okay, so then it's a refrain when it comes back the second time. It's not a refrain at the very beginning of the song. I'm just a little confused about that.
No, I would still call it the refrain.
Okay.
Technically, it's a refrain because it comes back, but you can still call it the refrain at the beginning if you want.
Right, because you can open up a song on the chorus or on the refrain.
Yeah, I know that's really super confusing. This is why I don't like words. This is why I analyze in letters. A. It is A.
Yeah.
And the first thing you hear is always A.
A material.
Right.
And it's usually... Is it usually the hook, so to speak? I mean...
you could think of it that way.
This is the part that everyone recognizes.
This is the part that everyone recognizes.
And so what are these episodes then?
The episodes are the things that happen between the B and the C.
Okay. Yeah. Got it. So refrain, episode, refrain, episode, refrain.
Yes.
In this case.
Yes.
Very good. And then when we say they're contrasting episodes, that just means that they sound different than the refrain.
They sound different. So they can be thematic contrasts.
Okay.
Meaning you hear a different melody or a different theme, if you will.
Okay. So new melodies have been brought in.
New melodies, new musical melodic material has come out.
Okay.
They can be tonal contrasts, meaning you're in a different key for a little while. Or they can easily be both. And in fact, the C section typically is something completely different. It sounds almost like a completely different piece of music.
Yeah.
The C section. Whereas the B section there's usually not new thematic material in the B section, although there are exceptions. Spoiler hint, the B section is usually not a lot of well-defined thematic material, but it is definitely a sort of tonal digression. We might be in a different key, or we might just be progressing through a different set of chords.
Okay. Let's see here. Some theorists prefer the term couplets for these contrasting segments. Have you heard that?
I've heard that.
So as not to confuse them with the fugal episode, which we haven't really talked about either.
Right, yeah. We haven't talked about the fugue yet. Episode is a term that's also used in the fugue. I don't know why they're so worried about confusing it. It functions the same way in both. In both forms. So I don't know why that's so confusing. But if you would rather be just as stuffy as you can possibly be, and say that the terms that we use for fugues, subject, counter subject, episode, etc., can only be used for a fugue. And I guess there are definitely scholars that are that stuffy about it. Then you can use the term couplet when you're talking about a rondo,
which is a poetic device, right? Is that how does it work in terms of what we're talking about?
I honestly don't know.
A couplet.
Again, this is why I like to analyze in letters.
Yes. Okay. Good.
And rondo, like all large forms, are sort of just stretched out, more complicated versions of simpler forms.
Okay.
For example, ternary form, ABA, right? Of which the aria, the Baroque aria, and there was a term for this kind of aria that does this. Hold on, da capo aria.
Yeah.
The da capo aria, where you sing A and then you sing B, which is completely different. Completely different style of music, different tempo, different key, different everything, and then sing A again, albeit with some show-offy variations because you're a really awesome opera singer, right? Is a simplified version. You can think of the rondo as being a more complex version of that, where the C section, the middle section of a rondo, is completely different. 100% different from what you would hear before, and the sections on either side of it, the ABA sections on either side of it, are merely stretched out. So you've taken just A and stretched it out to ABA. And then what you would have called B in the ternary form now has to be called C because you've used B already, and then you go back to ABA at the end, albeit with some modifications. Yeah. So you can think of it that way. You can think of sonata form as an expanded version of rounded binary in the same way, incidentally. I think we may have mentioned that.
What bugs me about ternary?
There's a lot of things that can bug people about ternary. What bugs you specifically?
In my case, it's because when I think ABA, I think there's just two sections.
It is just two sections.
But it's three because there's three things.
They're self-contained.
Self-contained, yeah.
Yeah. When we talk about ternary, we will definitely explain that distinction.
Okay. Well, I think we did before.
Okay, good.
I just probably should have listened to that
We don't
episode.
remember what we talked about. Look, we just come down here and turn the mics on and start, rambling. And
in the first couple of years, I could have, but this is episode 114.
This is episode 114, people. We don't remember everything we talked about.
And I know I've told some of the same stupid jokes over and over again.
Absolutely.
Because I'm fraught with those.
Absolutely. And by episode 115, I'm like openly being snarky to stuffy music scholars and like all kinds of stuff is going on. So.
Well, you've done that way earlier than that.
Probably.
But yeah, forgive us because we might. It never hurts to repeat some of this stuff, right?
Well, I mean, yeah, that's pedagogy is the art of skillful repetition, actually.
Okay. So, question for you.
Lay it on me.
In the rondo, well, let's just go ahead and clarify this because we talked about it. The simple.
I know what you're getting at. So.
Yeah. In the rondo, the refrains are often called harmonically closed.
Yes.
Could you define that? And also in binary form?
Yeah. By harmonically closed, we mean that they end in a perfect authentic cadence in the home key, in the original key.
Okay.
So they're not, if you remember our discussion of sonata form, we had this theme, and then it might end on a half cadence and then start transitioning to this secondary theme that's in this totally different key. And then that ends with a perfect authentic cadence, but in the wrong key.
Yes.
All of this stuff in sonata form. Rondo form, this A section is harmonically closed. So if we start out in the key of C major, we're going to do some stuff in this A section, but this A section is going to end, it is going to end, with that. It's going to end with this perfectly authentic cadence in the key of C major and be harmonically closed, and it's its own thing. It is actually very, very often a small form in and of itself.
Okay.
So the A section, the refrain, might in itself be a very short rounded binary or a very short sectional binary, or a very very short, even maybe a very short ternary, although that's probably less likely. But it's usually like either a rounded or sectional binary. Go check out episode 53 for a recap of those. But it'll be a harmonically closed little thing in and of itself. And
then by ending a piece in the perfect authentic cadence with the same key that you're in, you're kind of just shutting the book.
Shutting it off.
Closing the chapter, closing it off. That's end of that story.
Going to be convenient when we get to the end of the piece, and there's always an A at the end of a rondo, right? And we're going to need to finish it off in the right key and everything.
Yes.
So yeah.
Very cool, man.
Yeah. And in binary form, when we talk about A, B, A in binary form, if the A is harmonically closed, the A section of a binary form is harmonically closed in the same way, we call that sectional.
Okay.
Don't we? Hold on. Let me brain start working.
Matt is internally Googling.
So yeah, we will call that when the A is closed off like that, harmonically closed. We'll call that sectional binary.
Okay.
Yeah. Versus continuous binary if it's not, because if it's harmonically open, if it ended on the 5 or went to a new key or something, then the A section is kind of trailed off, and we'll need a B section to tie it back down, right? And end in harmonically closed, because the piece has to end harmonically closed.
Now, I feel like we did talk about that in small forms.
I hope so.
So let's hope both Matts agree, future Matt and past Matt.
Past Matt and future Matt does agree. After a little bit of mental Googling. It's been summer break, people. Give me a minute.
Right. I can't retain any of this stuff, man. I do an episode. I like research and do all the pre-work. And I'm a champ on the day.
Flies out of the back of your head.
Yeah, and then it's gone. So don't y'all, if you see me in the wild, don't go asking me about these forms, man, because I'm not. I'll call Matt.
Yeah, which is what he does, actually. He emails me and asks me about these things.
I do.
So yeah.
Okay, so the second episode, the C section. So the first episode, so we got the refrain, A section, B section, first episode, refrain, and then the second episode, which would be, I guess, the C section.
The C section.
Tends to be larger. With more developed character.
Tends to be in a different key.
Tempo, meter.
Can change.
Typically does.
Typically, fairly often. Let's say that.
Okay. And then, going back to what we talked about during the sonata, we talked about this thing called the transition and the retransition.
Right. Which is this sort of harmonically murky material that is pushing us into some new key. At least that's the transition.
Okay.
Right. So you kind of let go of real nice 2-5-1 kind of chord progressions, flew of something a little more weird, and you let go of your main melody for something that's a little more clouded. But it has this feel of this forward motion that is pushing us into this new key, right? So that we'll end up in this new key smoothly. It won't just sound like this great juxtaposition.
So there will often be the transition will be modulating typically.
That's what a transition does. This is modulates.
The modulating moment.
Yeah. And a retransition is modulating back to that original key.
Okay. So when going from the refrain into the C section, we would go through this little transition. And I don't know if does it typically do it before the B section or between sections, or is it?
We tend to think of modulating as something that happens between sections. You can assign it. If I was to assign it, I'd probably assign it to the C section.
Okay.
But I think a lot of analysts sort of think of it as connective material, sort of connective tissue between the sections.
See, in my mind, I would have just considered it the latter part of the B section, because I would say that the C section happens on the downbeat of when the new key comes
when the new key is in.
That's just me.
Yeah, well, that's what makes music complicated.
Yeah.
Especially harmonically open music, actually. So.
Indeed. Okay, so transition, retransition. Maybe we'll hear those in the up and coming piece we'll be listening to.
Yeah, let's see.
But it's basically a scrambling. It kind of scrambles. You think you are in a certain place, and then it takes you in a tornado, lifts you up, spins you around, drops you back off somewhere else.
Something like that.
Something like that. We had a Dorothy metaphor on the last episode. I don't know if it applies in this case.
It's still a transition. It should.
Let's talk about the two main types.
Let's talk about the two main types of rondo.
Rondos. Yes, sir.
So there is the 5-part rondo. In the 5-part rondo, you will have A, B, A, C, A.
Okay.
Basically, 2 episodes separated by 3 refrains.
Okay.
Right, 5 parts. You'll often hear it called the small rondo as well. Same deal, small rondo, 5-part rondo, A, B, A, C, A.
Okay.
So A will be in the home key, obviously, 1.
Yes.
Right. B will be in the dominant key, the key of the 5. So if this rondo is in D major, the B section will be in A, right? If it's in anything.
Not every time, though, right?
Not every time, because like I said, ever is always is as dangerous a word as never.
Yes.
Right? Sometimes B won't really be very clearly defined.
Because if we're in a minor key, is it more likely to
It'd still be in the major 5.
It would still go to major 5.
But, I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say there's no such thing as a minor key rondo that goes to the relative major. I mean, I bet I could find that if I looked really hard. And then we'll have A again, 1 again.
Uh-huh.
And then we'll have C, which can be literally anything, right? Just literally anything.
Any key.
Any key. I mean, it'll usually make some sense. It might go to the 6, then it might go to the relative major or the relative minor. Mm-hmm. Or it might go to the 6 or the 3 or the 4 is a real common one. Mm-hmm. But there's really no set key it has to go to. Mm-hmm. And then we will have A again in the home key again. A is always in 1. A is usually closed. Mm-hmm. A is usually some small kind of binary form, and it's worth mentioning that A will ditch the repeats as we move on. So the first time you hear A, you'll hear it with if it's in a binary form, it'll have the typical repeats that are part of that form, right? Where you have a little a, lowercase a, and then A gets repeated, and then BA, lowercase BA, and then those get repeated.
Okay.
But then when A comes back in the second time and the third time, those repeats will be jettisoned, and you'll just play the A section all the way through. There are actually also rondos where you don't play the entire A section. Some of those Beethoven rondos get pretty long and pretty involved, and just to keep them from being exhaustingly long, Beethoven will just play the A section, little A section of the big A section. He'll just play the first theme of the refrain.
And to me, it makes sense to repeat it the first time, because then that's just this. That's how you sinks into your head.
Gives you a chance to sort of soak it in and know it really well. Yeah, and then in subsequent times, you've heard this music before, right? You don't have to just belabor the point.
Yeah. Makes sense. Makes sense. And so that's the 5-part rondo.
That is the 5-part rondo. There is also the 7-part rondo, which you will also hear called the large rondo.
Okay.
Which you will also hear called the sonata rondo. So there are actually a couple of different versions of this. So the 7 part is A, B, A, C, A, B, A.
Abacaba.
Abacaba. With that C section in the middle being typically completely different, totally new music in a different key, right? Mm-hmm. Again, the A section will be in the home key, 1. The B will probably more regularly be in the dominant key, 5.
Okay.
A section, 1 again. And then the C section, which could be in 4 or 6 or 3 or who knows. Mm-hmm. And then ABA at the end. Now, it's this ABA at the end where you have a couple of variances. I have seen it where ABA is 1-5-1 again.
Oh, yeah.
But very often, ABA will all be in the home key again. So B will be modified to be in 1. So you'll have 1, 1, 1. And this is where we get the idea of it being a sonata rondo, because this is something sonata form does, right? When the recapitulation comes back at the end of sonata form, everything is in the home key all the way throughout.
Yes, I do recall that.
So this, because in this sonata rondo, when ABA comes back after C, everything is in the home key all the way throughout to the end of the piece now. It kind of gets likened to sonata form. You can say, well, the first ABA is sort of like exposition.
Exposition, yeah.
Summer break, people. Please bear with me. Where the first ABA is the exposition, and then the C is kind of the development, and then the second ABA is kind of like the recapitulation.
Yes.
The big difference is from sonata form being that A returns, ABA, right? There's that A between exposition and development. And C, the development is not a development of the themes you've heard before. It's completely new material.
I see. Okay, so there's no little trinkets or little devices that connect it to the A section.
Typically.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
Rhythmic things.
That would start sounding a lot like rondo. Now, it could happen, sure, but, just like new material can be introduced in the development section of a sonata form. Mozart was famous for that.
Mm-hmm.
But there's also but the main purpose of a development in a sonata form is to develop the themes you've heard. C section of a rondo typically is just a different piece of music.
Yeah. Very cool, man.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think it's time to go ahead and listen to our rondo?
I think we've done this enough.
There's nothing else you can say about the rondo?
Yeah, I think I've talked about the rondo fairly extensively at this point.
Okay.
So we're going to talk over it?
Yeah, we're going to talk over it, and then at the end of the episode, instead of having Mike talking at the end, I'm just going to play it all by itself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
So we can save me some writing, too. Okay, you ready?
Yes.
Okay.
So we're going to try to give a little play-by-play here of this very short 5-part rondo, ABACA, right?
Otherwise known as the small rondo.
Composed by Beethoven for Elise, with which you are all probably familiar.
And if you go to our website, musicstudent101.com, click on this episode 114, you can see I'll have the music there, and I'll go ahead and highlight with different colors the different parts as I do.
Indeed.
So it'll probably be helpful to check that out and read along.
Indeed.
If you can read music. That sounded insulting, didn't it? I can't read music that well, honestly. I'm just saying. I know not all of you can read music very well.
It's just a bunch of little black dots.
Yeah. Lots of them. Okay, so this is in 3/8.
This is in 3/8, a time signature Beethoven liked a lot, and is kind of complicated, but there you have it.
I submit it's a very slow 3/8. Is that what poco moto means?
Poco moto means little motion.
Little motion.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, you might also mean slow.
Okay. Well, without further ado, this is For Elise by Ludwig van Beethoven, performed by Dan Collins of HD Piano. All right. So,
our primary theme,
A material.
Our A section, our refrain.
We're in A minor.
Mm-hmm. And it repeats. This is the second part of the binary form.
This is the second. Okay.
And then our main theme comes back.
So this is still the A section.
We're all still in A. When you hear this theme, you're in A.
Yeah, okay. Even that major part.
Yeah. And now this second digression and return is repeated.
Yeah. Got it.
Harmonically closed. A minor.
Now,
B section.
B section. F major.
F major. Would you call this a retransition, maybe?
I think so. Or
Possibly.
transition.
Going back to the home key, so retransition.
Yeah, okay. So now we're
Wait
back.
for it.
Boom. So now we're on the A.
Refrain has returned.
The refrain.
And we're going to play the whole thing again, minus those repeats.
Yeah. So that's just the one time.
C section.
C section.
Completely different.
We got
Almost
that.
a completely different piece of music.
Yeah, they got that left hand pedaling on the A note. Mm-hmm. All this tension building. Very tense. Now, might this be a retransition?
Yeah, I could talk a lot about that, but A section.
Back to the A section.
Minus the repeats. And at the end of this A section, our piece of music is finished. A, B, A, C, A.
And that was definitely an authentic cadence at the end. We landed on the home key note, and the melody ended on the tonic.
It did. Again, convenient that the A section is harmonically closed, right? Because when you end the piece on A, and A is harmonically closed, then you managed to just end the piece satisfactorily.
Yes, sir.
You didn't end in the wrong key or something outrageous like that.
Nope.
Yeah, that would have probably gotten you drugged through the streets of Vienna or something.
Yeah, so I guess I mislabeled this as a transition going from the B section to the A section, but that would be a retransition.
Anything going back to the original key is considered retransition.
Let me see here. I'm not seeing any kind of transition, I don't think, into the B section. I think it just picks right up.
Yeah, nothing that would really warrant that label, no.
Okay. And then the beginning, the first A section, you said it was sectional rounded binary. Can we explain that?
Rounded,
again?
Yeah, rounded sectional binary.
Yeah.
Rounded as opposed to simple.
Uh-huh.
Because that primary theme returns at the end of it. Mm-hmm. Returns at the end of the A section.
Right.
So we have our theme, right? Everybody knows this. Yeah, and then that gets repeated, and then we go into this section. Whatever.
Good job. Yeah. That's pretty good for memory.
Yeah. And then at the end of that, and then that's sort of our digression.
Uh-huh.
Lowercase b, and then. And then this returns.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, my piano playing has suffered from summer break too. So because that main melody came back at the end, we call it rounded, as opposed to simple, which we would call it if it didn't.
Okay.
It is sectional because this first theme, before we go off into this digression, is also harmonically closed. So when we go. And then,
Okay.
ended on a perfect authentic cadence too.
Okay.
If it had ended on a half cadence or modulated to the 5 or something like that, we would not call it sectional. We would call it continuous.
I see.
Yeah. So and then it's binary because there's two things, right? There's this main theme and then there's this digression.
The minor thing and then the major thing.
Right. Yeah. Not ternary. We'll talk about ternary one day. In analyzing forms, you have to get used to the idea of simple sectional binary, rounded continuous binary, blah blah blah. Sort of getting all these definitions straight in your head, But yeah, we notice that our A section is, in fact, taken by itself a small little. What did I say? Rounded sectional binary, right? And it has repeats that are that are typical of such a small form, right? Where within big capital A there is lowercase a, b, a, and lowercase a is repeated, and then lowercase b, a is repeated.
Yeah.
But then, when our capital A section comes back later in the music, those repeats are taken out.
Yes.
Again, typical of rondo that A will be shortened in some way in the end of the piece, either taking out the repeats, sometimes playing just lowercase a, right, or something like that.
Why wouldn't they call that A prime?
In this particular case, I didn't think anything changed
Okay.
to call it A prime. If there were some kind of little melodic variations or something, you might could call it A prime. And if the original lowercase a ended harmonically open, to move us into this digression, and then coming out of the digression with the return, it was harmonically closed, then it would definitely be A, B, A prime, right? In this particular case, I didn't see anything change, so I just called it ABA.
So by simply removing one of the repeats, you wouldn't call it a prime?
No, okay. Repeats do not dictate form.
Okay.
Repeats can clue us into what form we're looking at, but repeats never dictate form to us.
Okay. And then one more clarification, because earlier we talked about, you said that the C section on this, for Elise, has more B section. qualities of a typical B section, right?
So this is funny.
Okay.
I had a very smart, very well-educated theory professor of mine once who said this, and it always stuck with me. He said, all pedagogy, all education is fundamentally a lie. You are fundamentally lying to people when you try to teach them anything.
114 episodes of sheer lies, huh?
Absolutely. Because you say things like, the B section of a rondo does this.
Yeah.
And immediately, there are a million examples of a B section of a rondo that's not doing this, right?
That's where I say typically. Things like that.
That's why professors are so fond of words like typically and in most cases.
Yeah.
And, stuff like that, because there's always those other examples. So you're fundamentally lying to them. His example was sonata form, but it applies here too. There are a million examples that doesn't do this. Mm-hmm. But you will never be able to intellectually get a handle on all those other million examples if you don't understand the paradigm. Uh-huh. If you don't first understand what is considered typical. And then in understanding what is considered typical, you can analyze and explore and remark upon the variations to that. The examples that are not typical. Uh-huh. So that's a little pedagogy philosophy there for you. That always stuck with me. I always thought that was interesting. And this is an example. Yeah. We've been lying to you. There are definitely a couple of salient examples of this particular rondo which are atypical. Uh-huh. For one thing, this B section is not in 5.
No.
It is in 6.
Yes, we went from A minor to F major.
To major 6.
Yes.
Yeah. Beethoven loved to do this. Beethoven loved to modulate down to the 6th, and he actually started a whole music theory tradition that was carried on by Schubert and Schumann and Chopin and other people in the Romantic era. They called it the flat 6 tradition or the 6 tradition. Yeah, where you're when you're in a minor key, and where you go is not to the relative major, but to the lowered 6, the flat 6, which is F in this case.
Love it.
Right. Yeah, and this is a very, very early example of Beethoven being a pioneer here. Mm-hmm. So he's not going to 5. He's going to that flat 6.
Yeah.
Right. So that's one thing. For another thing, there is all of this retransitional material. So there is retransitional material coming out of the B into the A section, which is interesting. That doesn't seem to usually happen in my experience.
Okay.
And then there is retransition coming out of the C section back into the A section. That's almost sonata form-ish dominant lock to me, except that he actually hit A minor kind of with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 bars or so left to go in the C section. He's back on the tonic, because it's part of this big retransition, and it's almost a thematic retransition. When he's
yeah,
that's almost a thematic retransition, because you're just expecting to. Right,
yeah.
So Beethoven's a genius. If I've never said that on this podcast, let me say it now. Beethoven's a genius.
Oh, I believe you.
And there is that. There is the fact that the B section is more thematically recognizable, more thematically cogent, and more of an actual theme than the C section is, the C section is more just kind of ambiguous, noodly kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And that is the reverse of what is typical in a rondo. Oh. Usually it is the C section that is the most thematically there, the most thematically recognizable and the most solid and unambiguous. And it is the B section that tends to be less of a recognizable thematic pattern. Beethoven has reversed this in this particular.
Hey, if I'm being honest, and I'm not the most constant or critical listener of this classical music, but I can, if you just played that B section by itself or the C section by itself without me knowing what the A section was, I might not have thought that was for Elise.
Yeah, I mean that is typical, right? That's why you need that refrain coming back to remind you of what you're in. Mm-hmm.
The hook.
Yeah. But this. Oh shoot. I should probably know better the sight read, but so this typical B section here, et cetera, et cetera.
I guess I recognize that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty solid musical theme, right? Yeah, that's the kind of thing that ought to be in the C section, not the B section.
I see.
So,
Although
fascinating.
in this one, the C section is completely different than either of those things.
The C section is completely different.
It's like the storm
but
comes
yeah, but the C section is itself just ambiguous, right? Just in every way, ambiguous and possessed of because it's got these big chords, and then this big chord here, this layer. Yeah.
Diminished. 4 of 4 to 4.
Yeah, and then the G sharp.
7 of 4 to 4.
Yeah. Kind of stuff, right? Yeah. So he's not really playing a theme here. He's not really playing a self-contained piece of music. He's doing this. It's really just a big, long retransition back to where he already was.
He's just bringing some energy.
Yeah, Beethoven's a genius.
Yeah.
Beethoven's a genius.
You think so?
I've heard that. He fits my definition fairly well. So
I'm glad we finally got to dig into him a little bit.
Oh, yeah, me too. What Beethoven does is rarely typical. And in fact, everything we've said, not just about rondo, but about the movements of a symphony and everything like that, Beethoven's going to fly in the face of everything.
Man, so maybe we shouldn't use him for so many examples.
But he's so perfect for so many examples, too. He's a genius.
It's just glorious.
Beethoven, for a very long time, was my favorite composer. He's a genius.
And then Mahler stepped in, or what?
Well, yeah, I guess.
Who's
So
your
then
favorite composer?
Anton Bruckner stepped in, and then Arvo Pärt stepped in.
Very cool, very
And
cool.
now I think Arvo Pärt's a genius.
All right.
He's a genius too, just in a different way from Beethoven.
Well, I think that pretty much closes up the episode.
I think that's it. I think we pretty much understand what a rondo is. If you would like to listen to other rondos, I would recommend the final movement of just about any Haydn symphony, especially the really famous ones.
Okay.
I would recommend the final movement of just about any string quartet by Haydn, Mozart, or Beethoven.
Does the Surprise Symphony end with a rondo? Do you know?
I am willing to bet it does.
Okay.
I would, and we can put. I can look up some specific examples to put on the website if we so choose. But there's a piano, the Pathetique Sonata. I want to say.
C minor.
Yeah. A very, very famous.
That's the one we were trying to come up with the other day.
Yeah.
I was singing it to Angela. I sent a message singing it to her on the phone. And I just did a horrible job, I guess, because she didn't recognize it.
Yeah.
But yeah,
I believe that's the rondo that ends the Pathetique Sonata. If that's not true, we'll post a correction in the next episode. But I believe that's the one that ends the Pathetique Sonata.
I'll double check it. I'll delete it if it's not.
Okay.
How about that?
Yeah. So a lot of very good rondos out there to listen to.
All right, man. Well, let's give a quick recap.
Quick recap.
The rondo is typically light and playful in mood, yes.
Typically light and playful, and typically fast more than anything. It's typically considered fast.
And it is typically, this is going to be the most overused word in the episode.
Typically, yeah.
Typically, it is the last movement of
a symphony, string quartet, or sonata.
Okay. What else?
It is divided into a refrain, an A section, which occurs again and again, and episodes, a B section and then a C section, which happen in between the refrains.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you have the A section is typically the kind of A material, so to speak.
Yeah, the returns again and again.
And then in the B section, we typically go to 5.
Typically go to 5.
And then back to A again.
And then back to A again.
And then the C section
is typically completely different. A completely different piece of music that could be in the 6 or the 3 or the 4 or who knows.
And then sometimes there will be a retransition.
Sometimes.
Back into the next section or back into the refrain.
Yeah, typically and sometimes are very important words for anybody analyzing any form.
And then that closes off. And that's the small rondo.
And that's the small
That's
rondo.
the 5-part rondo. A, B, A, C, A.
Yeah.
And then we have the 7-part rondo.
A, B, A, C, A, B, A.
And there
Which will be A in the 1, B in the 5, A and the 1, C and who knows again, it could be completely different. And then I've seen both variants where A, B, A will be 1-5-1 again. But most conventionally, and what people think of most is probably the last A, B, A being all in the home key.
Aha, yeah, okay.
So 1-5-1, question mark, 1-1-1. A, B, A, C, A, B, A. And that, because that has very important callbacks to sonata form, we will also often call this 7-part rondo a sonata rondo.
The large rondo, the 7-part rondo, the sonata rondo.
Yeah, and just as an aside, I know this recaps are bad places to add material, but speaking of adding material, you will often also see a coda attached to the end of all of this. So you'll be say A, B, A, C, A, B, A, and then a coda, which can do anything, which is just sort of tacked onto the end of the form, right? Just like we saw in sonata form, you can see a coda attached to the end of this.
And like the repeat, the coda is not considered a part of the form?
It's not considered a part of the form.
Okay.
It's something that exists outside of the form.
Okay.
I read this paper once, this person who was trying to make this argument that a coda is an analogy to death because it is a part of life that is also outside of life, and marks the end of life. And I mean, I don't know. You form your own opinion about that kind of stuff. But
I would think da capo because that's when you get your head cut off. Oh!
Actually, da capo means to the head.
Yeah, but
as in return to the top.
I think decapitate.
You think decap.
But I think wrong.
Yeah.
It's not of.
Yeah, it's
of
D-A capo, not D-E capo. And honestly, I could call the last little half of the C section here codetta. Just a little coda that ends the C section, not the whole piece.
Interesting.
I mean, Beethoven's a genius.
Codetta.
Have I mentioned that Beethoven's a genius?
I think typically.
Okay. Typically considered a genius. Yeah. Okay. But anyway, that should square you off on rondo pretty good, I think.
Yeah, I thought this was going to be a pretty small episode, but we actually got some pretty good content here.
I'm telling again, placing the lie to that idea of rondo as being a simpler form than sonata. It's really not. There's really a lot to consider in a rondo. And again, this is still painting a fairly thin brush. We could talk about rondo aesthetically much deeper than this.
Well, I got a show to play tonight and some practice to do for it.
All right.
So I guess it's time to get on out of here.
It's time to get on out of here. So we will go out by listening one more time. Sans play-by-play commentary by us.
Sans that, and then sans Mike. We're not even going to have Mike talking over this.
Yeah, to Beethoven's For Elise.
And what would Mike say during this part? He would probably say, "Thanks again for listening." And he might say, "You can support us by going to patreon.com/musicstudent101." And he might also say, "You can get our merchandise on redbubble.com/musicstudent101. Get yourself a t-shirt, get yourself a mug." What else would he say? Oh, if you have any questions or comments, you could write us in at info@musicstudent101.com.
And with that, here's For Elise.